Greetings and welcome back to Room 303 in our conversations with Gibran the Prophet. We are now in lecture number 13 on crime and punishment of a scheduled 30 lectures. We're covering all of these precious poems of this classic text. This is one of the longer poems, and he uses the word heavy words. That idea that some of what we're about to wade into is going to be difficult. Now, I should point out that from the trinity of the three houses, clothes, buying and selling, we now move to a new trinity, as I like to think about it, of crime and punishment, laws and freedom. Al-Mustafa, the prophet, will now wade into some of the oldest kinds of arguments that we're going to find. Now, our assumptions are that you've been following our stuff at learnstrong.net down that left-hand side, our playlist, and I'm hopeful that you've already worked through our introductory stuff, and as we've said, we just finished with buying and selling. I'm hopeful that you've already been exposed to all the previous 12 lectures as we now get ready for this one. Why? Because this is difficult stuff we're about to get into. This is going to be Gibran's romanticism, the question of evil and social ills. The only sin is to forget seems to be one of his chief arguments. We're going to see the trinities of this poem, the ontological view, as we've talked about it earlier, where the human is perceived as having actually three, God's self, the unevolved self, and then the human. And we'll talk about why this matters, and as it relates especially to Freud and to Plato as well. So we mustn't forget our Plato here. We do have the golden rule played out, the Hindu and the Buddhist rule of karma, and Kant's categorical imperative. So there's lots and lots of philosophy that will be played out here. No question, obviously, a spiritual view is always going to be our goal as he's talking about crime and punishment. We're only as strong as our weakest link will be his argument in this passage. Now, we mustn't forget that Gibran was raised a Maronite Christian, think Catholicism here. And I think that for Gibran, he was always dancing between, on the one hand, his kind of Christian upbringing and then his romanticism, especially as it relates to this question of crime and punishment. Immediately, of course, we think about Dostoevsky's classic Crime and Punishment in 3A, no question. Now, romantic ontology, as we have said in many lectures that are posted at 303, is always going to begin from this notion that humans are by nature inherently good, and then somehow deprived through their education, and that will cause all kinds of challenges for them. Let's enjoy the passage. Then, one of the judges, it's significant it would be a judge, right, who's going to mete out crime and punishment. One of the judges of the city stood forth and said, "Speak to us of crime and punishment." He answered, saying, "It is when your spirit goes wandering upon the wind that you alone and unguarded commit a wrong unto others, and therefore unto yourself. And for that wrong committed must you knock and wait a while unheeded at the gate of the blessed." Well, think about the actual Greek word sin, hamartia, as being to miss the mark, especially when one is shooting an arrow. And this idea that you alone and unguarded commit a wrong unto others will immediately take us, of course, to the message of Christ on the cross. Forgive them, for they know not what they do. Very much a Platonic idea from Republic 7. Individuals sitting in a cave, chained. They don't understand its shadows on the wall and all of that. That is to say, the only sin is to forget. To forget what? Well, your true self, and we'll now get into it. Now, notice how he plays this game of talking about the tripartite self. Like the ocean is your God self. Now, and by the way, point out all the similes here to yourself. Like the ocean is your God self. It remains forever undefiled. Now, this is fundamental romanticism here. And like the ether, it lifts but the winged. Even like the sun is your God self. It knows not the ways of the mole, nor seeks it the holes of the serpent. In other words, you can't debase this God self. But your God self dwells not alone in your being. Now here we go with a second. Right? Again, this idea that there is a lack of knowing when one does something inappropriately. Takes us to obviously the Luke 23, 34 through 38 passage, "Forgive them, for they know not what they do." For your God self dwells not alone in your being. Number two, much in you is still man, and much in you is not yet man. That is to say, but a shapeless pygmy that walks asleep in the midst, searching for its own awakening. Of course, this being asleep and needing the awakening will take us to Henry David Thoreau's Walden. As we've commented on, we've given full lectures at LearnStrong.net. We must learn to reawaken and keep ourselves awake, not by mechanical aids, but by an infinite expectation of the dawn that will not forsake us in our soundest sleep. And he'll go on to say, I know of no more encouraging fact than the unquestionable ability to elevate one's life with a conscious endeavor. And obviously, Gibran is playing a very similar game. And of the man in you would I now speak. So this is going to be the ontological perspective that we have a God self, we have man, and then we have the pygmy. Think about Freud's superego as being the God self, the ego as being the man, and then of course the id as being that pygmy, right? For it is of the man, and is of the man in you would I now speak. For it is he, and not your God self, nor the pygmy in the midst, that knows crime and punishment of crime. So here we go. Oftentimes I've heard you speak, and again, this is construction we're now familiar with, right? Oftentimes I've heard you speak of one who commits a wrong as though he were not one of you, but a stranger unto you, and an intruder upon your world. That is to say, the criminal is usually perceived as the other. That which has done something terrible is of the other. But, notice he plays his game. Oftentimes, blah, 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 but, right? I say that even as the holy and the righteous cannot rise beyond the highest, which is in each one of you, so the wicked and the weak cannot fall lower than the lowest, which is in you also. And then he will use this simile of leaves in a tree. Watch this. And as a single leaf turns not yellow, but with the silent knowledge of the whole tree, so the wrongdoer cannot do wrong without the hidden will of you all. And then he goes to a second simile. Like a procession, you walk together towards your God self. You are the way and the wayfarers. And when one of you falls down, he falls for those behind him, a caution against the stumbling stone. And he falls for those ahead of him, who, though faster and surer of foot, yet removed not the stumbling stone, which obviously takes us to Matthew 18:6 and Mark 9:42 about don't be a stumbling block and all of that. In other words, what's the argument he's making? We cannot think of criminals, those who break the law, as somehow being different from ourselves. We're all in this thing together. We all rise, we all fall. And of course, his word picture of the leaf on the tree that is turning yellow, all of the tree is aware of that in some way. Well, this is an interesting argument. It says, we're all kind of responsible for each other. And of course, his high calling will be the calling of love. And this also, though the word lie heavy upon your hearts. Now, I think that Gibran knew, and I think this is why there's always been this debate amongst scholars. Why would he place them in the order in which they're placed? Notice I said this is our new trinity, right? Of crime and punishment, law and freedom. And I think that the three passages will go together rather well. Why did he wait for a passage like this so much into the middle? I mean, think of it this way. We're 2 lectures away from being halfway through our planned 30 lectures. So we're very close to the middle of this text. I think he holds it here because of what he's about to say. These are heavy words. These are difficult words. It's hard for us to wrap our brain around the fact that those in our community who do terrible things are us, and we're a part of them. We're all connected in some way. He's going to say, this is heavy stuff. Let's take a look at it. And this also, though the word lie heavy upon your hearts. The murdered is not unaccountable for his own murder. And the robbed is not blameless in being robbed. Now, of course, we immediately go, wait. What about children and the abuse of children? Well, the innocent. These are going to be hard. These are going to be hard concepts. The righteous is not innocent of the deeds of the wicked, and the white-handed is not clean in the doings of the felon. Yea, the guilty is oftentimes the victim of the injured, and still more often the condemned is the burden bearer for the guiltless and unblamed. You cannot separate the just from the unjust and the good from the wicked. For they stand together before the face of the sun, even as the black thread and the white are woven together. We're back to weaving metaphor as he talks about you can't separate. And when the black thread breaks, the weaver shall look into the whole cloth, and he shall examine the loom also. Now, again, this is compelling stuff. This says that if we live in a community that we are going to account as we're all responsible to each other and obviously for ourselves, then we have to think about those who break the law, those who are criminals, as being a part of us. It's a very humane way, obviously, to think about criminality, no question. And then interestingly, he goes to the John 8 passage of the Gospels, where you'll maybe remember that a woman is brought in adultery, and of course she is to be stoned, and it's recorded that Christ is going to write in the sand or the dirt, and he's going to write something, and then of course culminating with that famous line, "He who is without sin casts the first stone," which will then immediately take all of those who would be willing to stone the woman away. He says it this way: "If any of you would bring to judgment the unfaithful wife," it's interesting he would choose that, right? "Let him also weigh the heart of her husband in scales." We're back to those scales from earlier passages, and obviously we think of the scales of the Iliad. "And measure his soul with measurements." Now this is always going to be Gibran's approach. I think this is why people love Gibran so much, because he's always going to take any kind of social question down to the psychological first. In other words, before we talk about the group, let's talk about you, the individual. "And let him who would lash the offender look unto the spirit of the offended. And if any of you would punish in the name of righteousness, and lay the axe unto the evil tree, let him see to its roots." What is the origin of evil in the world, and pain and suffering and criminality? He says it's usually going to be because of a neglect by the community at large. "And verily, he will find the roots of the good and the bad, the faithful and the fruitless, all," and here's your key word, "intertwined together in the silent heart of the earth." Again, this notion that we're all connected in some way. So we cannot take individuals in our society, he says, and place them somewhere out there and call them the other, because we're all implicated in this together. "And you judges who would be just, what judgment pronounce you upon him who, though honest in the flesh, yet is a thief in spirit?" This is that notion that you can be right and still be wrong. "What penalty lay you upon him who slays in the flesh, yet is himself slain in the spirit?" In other words, put someone in a terrible circumstance, watch them grow up without education, without proper love, and then watch how they misbehave. But that individual can't be fully held responsible for that until we ourselves, who are those who help to provide the community for that individual, we must challenge ourselves. Again, this is heavy stuff. This is hard words, guys, no question. "And how prosecute," you again talking to the judge, "how prosecute you him who in action is a deceiver and an oppressor, yet who also is aggrieved and outraged?" Now, I think ideas like this have given rise to a whole lot of debate through the late 20th century, early 21st century, about how we are responsible for everyone within the community. Again, Gibran's stuff is so ubiquitous in so many different people's way of thinking. And now he continues. More rhetorical questions that are compelling. Now, think about remorse, feeling guilty. "And how shall you punish those whose remorse is already greater than their misdeeds? Is not remorse the justice which is administered by that very law which you would fain serve? Yet you cannot lay remorse upon the innocent, nor lift it from the heart of the guilty. Unbidden shall it call in the night, that men may wake and gaze upon themselves." Of course, the obvious question is this always true? And what are those individuals who commit certain kinds of criminal acts and feel no remorse whatsoever? "And you who would understand justice, how shall you unless you look upon all deeds in the fullness of light?" And this is a compelling idea. We're all, of course, interested in movements that would support and celebrate justice for all people. The challenge, of course, is to look first at ourselves. This will be his argument. "Only then shall you know that the erect and the fallen are but one man standing in twilight between the night of his pygmy self and the day of his God self. I think this is the key line in this poem. Some have argued it's the key line in all of the prophet from the sociological model. I'll read it again. Only then shall you know. Just look at the brilliance of this poetic line. The erect and the fallen are but one man, standing in twilight between the night of his pygmy self and the day of his God self. And that the cornerstone of the temple, remember he's delivering these words, Al-Mufasa is delivering these words in front of a temple, and that the cornerstone of the temple is not higher than the lowest stone in its foundation. That is to say, we're all in this together. And at 2a, what are we going to do with a passage like this? Well, I think he's arguing that all humanity shares responsibility for crime, right, and for justice. The erect and the fallen are but one man, as he will say it. At 2b, I love the word pictures. The temple, the foundation stone. This is a compelling idea, given that he obviously is presenting this in front of the temple. At 3a, well, of course, I mentioned Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment. Think about the power of Plato and Freud. Of course, for Plato, it's what are the tripartite view of man. We've given these lectures at LearnStrong.net, reason, emotion, and desire. Of course, that's Freud's superego, ego, and id, and as we commented, that's the God self, the man, and the pygmy, right, for Gibran. Finally, at 3b, what are you going to do with these heavy words? I mean, do you believe that this is the right way to consider the criminal? And what are we going to do with individuals who don't show that level of remorse? Is that maybe because of faulty education? Do you accept Gibran's basic assumptions that all humans have this God self, as he will call it? Do you believe that? And when was a time that you felt remorse? And was it a useful feeling for you? Now, I said this is the first of a three or a tripartite collection of poems. So from this, we move on now, interestingly, from Crime and Punishment to his view of laws, which will obviously challenge us and take us back to Plato's great dialogue, Laws. Thank you.